The U.S. government lied to the most recent immigrants coming into the country, making the Panhandle seem like a wonderful and beautiful place, when in reality it was not. It consisted of empty, phantom towns that were being filled with new immigrants. Plots of this land were being sold to the immigrants at $45 apiece. The cultivation of the land was worn out due to the abuse of the land. This abuse started when farmers were planting wheat that was never consumed by prospective clients of the farmers, creating a surplus. Effects of the environmental state included diseases known as dust pneumonia and whooping cough. Other changes included suffocation, migration, and lastly death due to the particles of dirt found in the region. Death occurred in both humans and animals such as cattle. The planting options in the Great Plains and Panhandle during this time were for the most part corn and wheat. The geography of the Panhandle and Great Plains made the climate very cold and windy, which made it very difficult to stay warm in this area. This area was also lacking rain, which led to a drought. The areas of settlement in the Great Plains were in the states of Texas, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and New Mexico. These areas were populated by cowboys and newly arrived immigrants. Most of the new immigrants consisted of Southern and Eastern Europeans, as opposed to Northern Europeans.
The Great Plains were a rich and territorial land from Texas to Canada. All this land was first utilized by Native Americans such as the Comanche, Apache, and the Kiowa. Each Native American group had their own language and religion. During the early 20th century, many countries such as Germany, Sweden, and Denmark immigrated to the United States and found a home in the Great Plains. The group that had no trouble adapting to their new lifestyle were the German Russians, who were used to living in tight communities. The most important group in the book are the Anglo-Saxons whose farming techniques were innovated from different places. Their irrigation system consisted of windmills and underground piping systems that extracted water from below. In the book it states that in the city called Dalhart, there is a sign stating, "Black man, don't let the sun come down on you here." This shows how the Anglo-Saxons wanted to be in control of their area.
There was a diversity of people during the Dust Bowl. Russian immigrants going towards the American dream. Germans from the Volga River who immigrated from Russia to the Great Plains. Farmers. There was a farmer in particular named Don Hartwell who was keeping a journal of one of the worst droughts that was happening. He had not seen a drought like that in years. There was also cowboys. And then there was just the normal American people. Many saw this catastrophe as a punishment from God for what they did during the 20s and how they abused the land.
Carly Lucas was just as desperate as every man was to feed his family, so he moved to no man's land. He hoped that he would make enough money to support his family. Over a few years, he was desperate to sell as much wheat as possible because of these hard times. Jews were to be blamed for the hard times. Hertzen was Jewish and ran a store. Blackjack robbed Hertzen's store and shot Hertzen, leaving him to die. Blackjack was captured 4 years later and was executed. Hazel's uncle didn't want to shoot his cow in the head. He didn't want to see her suffocate because it was considered wrong to keep an animal alive in no man's land. Governments wanted every animal off of no man's land. The Osteens had a hard time breathing. Their throats were very dry. Red Cross distributed masks, but even then they would get clogged because of the dust.
The Great Depression changed the opportunities for farmers. Many lost their homes. 1 out of 20 were losing their lands because they could not afford to pay off their debts. In 1933, the amount of crops decreased, especially wheat, due to overproduction. Therefore, farmers decided to burn their wheat instead of selling it. Later on in 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt released a new plan, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, also known as the AA, that helped restore crops by growing less crops and bringing the price back up to its normal cost. The Dust Bowl greatly affected everyone. Homesteaders will survive by saving food from the previous harvest. In 1932, many farmers struggled to plant wheat in hopes of a better harvest for next year, but the dust storms made it impossible.